Stock up on food today to be well prepared for tomorrow's Hunger Games. Food scarcity has been a reality for many generations of people around the world, whether we like to think about it or not. Public panic, natural disasters, economic collapse, and even war can all cause them. History does not repeat itself, American humorist Mark Twain is said to have said, but it frequently rhymes. And, while you can't predict a food shortage or the global event that causes it, you can certainly plan for one. The best time to prepare for a food shortage, they say, was yesterday, and the next best time is today. Most of us begin by going through the pantry and making a shopping list, and then heading out to the supermarket to stock up. This, I'm sure you'll agree, is best done when others aren't on the same mission as you. Avoid panic, avoid lines, and stock up on emergency food so it's ready when you need it. To assist you, we've compiled a list of the best foods to stock up on so you don't have to worry about what to cook or eat in the event of a food shortage. Moist foods spoil quickly because the bacteria that cause spoilage thrive in conditions of sufficient humidity and room temperature. When fats are exposed to air, they oxidize and eventually go rancid. Unsurprisingly, raw, fatty foods with a lot of water come in last, whether they're meat, dairy, vegetables, or fruit. People devised ingenious methods to preserve food for long periods of time, thousands of years before refrigeration, by drying it to remove much of the moisture and sometimes grinding it up into flour and meal. They also discovered that curing meat with saltpeter, the precursor to the nitrites and nitrates used to preserve meat today, not only improved its texture, aroma, and flavor, but also allowed it to last for months rather than hours. Flour, cornmeal, dried grains and legumes, and cured meats are still among the most shelf-stable foods in the supermarket and, along with canned foods, are your best bet for an emergency stockpile. How to keep flour, dried goods, and canned foods should be stored in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Keep foods away from your stove, under the sink, on the windowsill, or in a damp garage or unventilated basement. If your home has humidity issues, a good dehumidifier is often the only, albeit expensive, solution. Animals can and frequently do chew through paper and plastic packaging. Separate your foods into food storage boxes with lids closed to keep them safe and prevent infestation, or remove them from their original packaging and transfer them into our food storage containers. Many of the foods on our list have an infinite shelf life. We recognize that this is a bold statement, but we've taken the time to research these claims and link to credible sources, such as the Food Safety Inspection Service at the United States Department of Agriculture and a number of American universities. Wherever we've made them, however, no food is ever truly fresh. Cured meats deteriorate over time, dried foods lose their appeal, and canned foods degrade into flavorless mush. So, whenever you put something on the shelf or in the freezer, write the date on a label. Rotate your food supplies by depleting them and replenishing them every 2 to 3 years. That way, if and when there is a food shortage for whatever reason or another, a food shortage does hit, all the items in your stockpile will be in their prime. Foods in powder. Powdered foods are created by drying and grinding grains, kernels, beans, nuts, or seeds until a large portion of the outer layer is removed. The starches and proteins are converted into a shelf-stable powder that can be stored at room temperature for long periods of time. Fine powders are referred to as flour, while coarse powders are referred to as meal. Brown powders have been ground less coarsely, while white powders have been ground more finely. The more nutrients and oils a powder contains, the darker and coarser it is, and thus the shorter its shelf life. Flour is a pantry staple made from ground grain, typically wheat. It is the main ingredient in baking and, when combined with oil and heated on the stovetop to form a roux, can be used to thicken and bind any dish. Although there are many different types of flours, and each country has its own grading system, flour can be divided into 3 categories: low-protein, mid-protein, and high-protein flours. Cake flour and pastry flour, 7% gluten, are low-protein flours that produce tender, delicate goods. High-protein flours, such as bread flour, 13% gluten, produce firm, chewy results. All-purpose flour, 8 to 11% gluten, and the majority of other flour varieties fall somewhere in the middle. Baked goods made with bread flour are generally loftier and heartier. While all-purpose flour is always an option, unbleached bread flour provides the best balance of affordability, durability, and nourishment. Bags of flour will keep for 6 to 9 months if stored in a cool, dry place. Flour deteriorates in both taste and ability to rise when it stales. Flour that has yellowed, grayed, or mold growth on it should be discarded. Frozen flour is safe to eat indefinitely, but it loses its best qualities after 1 to 3 years. Bags of flour should be stored in food storage boxes with the lid closed. Transfer the flour from its original packaging to mason jars or airtight food storage containers instead. Store flour in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Cornmeal, the coarse flour made from dried and ground corn kernels, has several uses in the kitchen. To begin with, you can combine it with milk and eggs, or water and butter, to make cornbread. When fried in oil, coat cutlets with it to give them a crispy, golden brown crust. Alternatively, in a cup, combine equal parts cornmeal and water and whisk together to make a slurry that thickens watery sauces, soups, braises, and stews almost instantly. Bags of cornmeal will keep for 1 year if stored in a cool, dry place. Cornmeal deteriorates in terms of aroma and flavor when it stales. Cornmeal that has yellowed, grayed, or mold growth should be thrown away. Frozen cornmeal is safe to eat indefinitely, but it loses its best qualities after 2 to 3 years. Cornmeal should be stored in food storage boxes with the lid closed. Transfer the cornmeal from its original packaging to mason jars or other airtight food storage containers. Store cornmeal in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Protein from peas. Pea protein is a powdery substance made from dried and ground yellow peas. Erica Jolson of Healthline describes it as a high-quality protein source that contains all 9 essential amino acids that your body cannot produce and must obtain from food. A bag or 2 of pea protein, while more popular among smoothie drinkers than preppers, deserves a place in your emergency food stockpile. It is used to make German Erbswurst and as a thickener in pea soup, or any soup made with green vegetables. For that matter, bags of pea protein should be stored in food storage boxes with the lid closed. Transfer the pea protein from its original packaging to mason jars or other airtight food storage containers. Store pea protein in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Dried foods. Drying is the world's oldest method of food preservation. People in the Middle East began drying food in the hot sun as early as 12,000 BC. According to the National Center for Food Preservation at the University of Georgia, dried foods can be stored in a cool, dark place away from direct sunlight and moisture, such as a cupboard or pantry, basement, root cellar, or survival shelter, for 1 to 3 years. Dried foods can be stored and consumed for 1 to 2 years after their expiration date, as long as they do not show signs of mold growth, in which case they should be discarded. However, storage will affect their texture, aroma, and flavor, and they will eventually become inedible. Drying preserves food so well because it removes a large portion of its moisture content, either through dehydration or desiccation, inhibiting the growth of bacteria, yeasts, and molds, all of which require water to thrive. Pasta. Dried pasta, also known as boxed pasta because it is sold in boxes at every supermarket, is one of the best foods to stock up on if a food shortage occurs. In the event of a food shortage, dried pasta is one of the first items to disappear from supermarket shelves. Pasta is inexpensive to buy, stores easily, and cooks simply by boiling it in salted water and mixing it with a sauce. That sauce can be anything from garlic and olive oil to canned tomatoes to shredded cheese. Drying preserves food so well because it removes a large portion of its moisture content, either through dehydration or desiccation, inhibiting the growth of bacteria, yeasts, and molds, all of which require water to thrive. It is not only a good source of carbohydrates and some wheat protein, but it also has a good mineral content including calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc, as well as B vitamins, according to nutritionist Nicola Subrook of BBC's Good Food. Shelf life. Dried pasta does not really expire when properly stored, but it keeps its best qualities for 1 to 3 years. Keep track of when you bought it and rotate your supply every few years. Dry pasta should be stored in mason jars or airtight food storage containers. If you want to keep it in its original packaging, store it in a food storage box with a lid to keep pests out. Rice. Rice is useful for peppers who want to stock up on dried foods in case of a food shortage. It's cheap and filling, and it goes well with hearty meats or spicy sauces. It's delicious as a main dish, a side dish, or a dessert with a sprinkle of sugar in the cooking water. White rice has the longest shelf life of any grain at the grocery store. When properly sealed and stored, rice food specialist Brian Nummer on Utah State University's Preserve the Harvest website, polished white rice will store well for 25 to 30 years. Although brown rice contains more nutrients than white rice, its oil content causes it to spoil faster. Brown rice has a shelf life of 6 to 12 months as a general rule. Brown rice develops a rancid odor and begins to taste bad over time and should be discarded. Rice is a good source of carbohydrates, which are the body's main fuel source, according to the Kendall Reagan Nutrition Center at Colorado State University. Brown rice also has a high fiber content, as well as manganese, selenium, magnesium, and B vitamins. White rice can be stored properly for 2 to 3 decades, while brown rice can be stored for 6 months to a year. Frozen white rice is safe to eat indefinitely, but it loses its best qualities after 1 to 3 years. Rice can and frequently is infested before you bring it home from the store. Freeze rice in its original packaging for a week to kill any insect eggs or larvae. After the grains have been frozen, transfer them to a food storage box with a lid or mason jars or airtight food storage containers for room temperature storage. Legumes, pulses, whether it's beans, lentils, or peas. Legumes, also known as pulses when dried, are inexpensive, store well, and provide plenty of nutrients for rainy days and food shortages. They are also a viable meat substitute due to their high protein content. According to registered dietitian Nicole Hopsecker of the Cleveland Clinic, 1 serving of beans, which equates to 12 cups of boiled beans, contains approximately 7 grams of protein, the same as 1 ounce of meat. Indeed, many cultures combine legumes and grains for a hearty, filling meal that nourishes both the body and the soul with proteins from the legumes and carbohydrates from the grains. Consider the Italian pasta fagioli or the Cuban black bean chili. Beans, lentils, and peas will keep in their original packaging for 1 to 3 years. Frozen beans are safe to eat indefinitely, but lose their best qualities after 1 to 3 years. Beans can be stored in mylar bags with the air removed for up to 10 years. Beans should be stored in their original packaging in a food storage box with the lid closed. Transfer them to mason jars or airtight food storage containers instead. Keep the beans in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight. Foods in cans. Nicolas Appert, a French chef and confectioner, began experimenting with food preservation methods in the 1790s. Heating food in sealed glass bottles kept it from spoiling, he discovered. As a result, Appert began selling preserved beef, fowl, eggs, milk, soups, and stews. Thus was born canning, one of the most modern methods of food preservation. Canned food is placed in airtight glass jars or tin cans and sealed by boiling. Because the high heat kills all bacteria and inactivates the enzymes that cause spoilage, canned foods can be stored indefinitely. Foods in cans. Nicolas Appert, a French chef and confectioner, began experimenting with food preservation methods in the 1790s. Heating food in sealed glass bottles kept it from spoiling, he discovered. As a result, Appert began selling preserved beef, fowl, eggs, milk, soups, and stews. Thus was born canning, one of the most modern methods of food preservation. Canned food is placed in airtight glass jars or tin cans and sealed by boiling. Because the high heat kills all bacteria and inactivates the enzymes that cause spoilage. Canned foods can be stored indefinitely. Foods can be canned at home. However, for your own and your family's safety, you must ensure that you do it correctly. Clostridium botulinum, the deadly bacteria that causes botulism, thrives in low-acid foods and in the absence of air, both of which are characteristics of many canned meats and vegetables. If you're interested in food preservation and canning, go ahead and learn about it. Otherwise, stock up on canned goods from the grocery store. They are inexpensive and sufficient for most people. Soups in cans. Canned soups come in many varieties, from Campbell's condensed chicken noodle soup to Amy's organic split peas, and you can stock up on 12 packs of your family favorites for a low price, especially at some brick-and-mortar stores and certain online retailers. It's a good idea to keep canned soups on hand. Because they're pre-cooked, you can either heat them up for a hot dinner or eat them cold if the power goes out. Condensed soups provide more value for your money. Simply dissolve in water, stir to combine, and heat or eat cold. Shelf life. When canned soup is properly stored and unopened, it can be eaten indefinitely. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for about 2 to 3 years. Storage. Keep canned soup in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Cans that have significant denting, swelling, bulging, leaking, or rust should be discarded because they are no longer safe to eat. Meat in cans. Canned meats are a must-have for the carnivore prepper, and for good reason. From ham and corned beef to chicken breast and turkey to anchovies and sardines, canned red meat, poultry, and seafood are high in fats and proteins that stick to the ribs and comfort the soul. When in doubt, stick to the tried and true: classic Spam, Libby's corned beef, King Oscar Mediterranean sardines, and Cento flat anchovies. Eat them cold, warm them up for a quick meal with a few slices of bread, or use them to make everything from corned beef and cabbage to pasta isard. Shelf life. When canned meat is properly stored and unopened, it can be eaten indefinitely. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for about 2 to 3 years. Storage. Keep canned meat in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Cans that have significant denting, swelling, bulging, leaking, or rust should be discarded because they are no longer safe to eat. Tomatoes in cans. Canned tomatoes are the most versatile canned food, and they are an absolute must-have in the event of a food shortage. Whole tomatoes are preferable to diced or crushed tomatoes because you can do whatever you want with them and they keep longer. Your dinner options with canned tomatoes are only limited by your imagination. On a hot summer night, you can make Andalusian gazpacho, Spanish rice, or a pasta dinner for the family in under 30 minutes, or slow cook them in a braise, soup, stew, or dare we say it, chile. Canned tomatoes have an indefinite shelf life if properly stored and unopened. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for about 2 to 3 years. Storage. Keep canned tomatoes in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Vegetables in cans. Every grocery store will have a variety of canned vegetables to choose from. White beans, red kidney beans, and black beans are good for chilies, burritos, and enchiladas. Green beans, sweet peas, and asparagus spears are good for soups. Beets, corn, carrots, and mushrooms are good for salads, and artichoke hearts, turnip greens, and yams are good for variety. Canned vegetables are pre-cooked, which means you can eat them cold, warm them up, or cook with them. They're ready to eat right out of the can. And the choice is entirely yours. Shelf life. When canned vegetables are properly stored and unopened, they can be eaten indefinitely. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for about 2 to 3 years. Vegetables in cans. Every grocery store will have a variety of canned vegetables to choose from. White beans, red kidney beans, and black beans are good for chilies, burritos, and enchiladas. Green beans, sweet peas, and asparagus spears are good for soups. Beets, corn, carrots, and mushrooms are good for salads, and artichoke hearts, turnip greens, and yams are good for variety. Canned vegetables are pre-cooked, which means you can eat them cold, warm them up, or cook with them. They're ready to eat right out of the can, and the choice is entirely yours. Shelf life. When canned vegetables are properly stored and unopened, they can be eaten indefinitely. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for about 2 to 3 years. Or rust should be discarded as they are no longer safe to eat. Milk. Condensed. When it comes to dessert, no milk keeps as well as condensed milk. Condensed milk, which is thick and sweet, is usually found in the baking aisle of the grocery store, right next to the evaporated milk. Condensed milk is sweetened, evaporated milk not. Nicolas Appert, the father of canning, was the first European to condense milk in 1820 in France. Gail Borden Jr., an American, invented a method for making condensed milk that could be transported without refrigeration in 1853. Condensed milk has an indefinite shelf life when canned, unopened, and properly stored. It will, however, only keep its best qualities for 1 to 2 years. Storage. Keep cans of condensed milk cool and dry, away from direct sunlight and heat sources. Oils for cooking. Most cooking oils have an unopened shelf life of 18 to 24 months. When an oil bottle or can is opened, it begins to react with the oxygen in the air. It eventually oxidizes and becomes rancid, causing it to smell bad and impart an unpleasant flavor to your foods. However, rancid oil can be used to light a lamp. Finally, the type of cooking oil you stock up on is a matter of personal preference. The majority of people prefer olive oil. If you're one of them, opt for filtered extra virgin olive oil, which provides the best balance of quality and shelf life. Unfiltered olive oil contains olive particles that reduce its shelf life significantly. Tin cans are a more substantial and less expensive emergency supply. They are difficult to use up once opened before they go rancid, at least in most households. As a result, it is preferable, albeit counterintuitive, to purchase the oil in bottles. Purchase your oil in tinted glass bottles. They are plastic-free and protect the oil from the harmful effects of sunlight.